I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and so I've lived my entire life in Oregon. We have 3 children. John and I were married in 1972 at the ripe old age of 18, and began our journey of figuring out what we were going to do with our lives. I worked in a dental office. He went to college, became a Portland police officer, and announced in 1984, came home and said, you know, I think I'm going to run for office. And I was pregnant with our 3rd child, our daughter Jennifer, and I was about 7 months along, and I said, that's nice, honey, you go run for office, I'm going to have a baby. So as it turned out, the gentleman that won that primary was recalled from office, and then the governor appointed John. He was actually elected by the precinct committee people. His name was forwarded to the Multnomah County Board, and then he was appointed eventually by the board and then Governor Atiyeh to serve in 1985. So that's how our journey began. John went down to serve, and he actually took on the staff at that time of the former member, and then ran for re-election, was elected, and then I began my journey and my experience in the Oregon Legislature by working for him as running his office and being staff in the building. His mother came and lived with us, and she was our angel. She had 3 boys, and she's a single mom, raised 3 boys, and so she would come during the legislative session, and that lady cleaned our house, took care of our children, did our grocery shopping, did our laundry. She was amazing. I don't know that we could have managed truly without her. I remember walking in, and I was in awe as I looked around. I was in the Capitol Dome. I can't even explain it. I was just in awe of the beauty of that building, but I was very intimidated. And I remember just being, what do you wear? I'm a member's wife. What does a member's wife wear? How do you speak at functions? How do you conduct yourself? And what is proper? So I remember all these experiences and all these thoughts about wanting to be, a compliment, but also, competent in your position there as well. So it was a learning curve, and we became a very good team. There were a couple of ladies in the Republican caucus. I was young. I was in my 30s. So comparatively speaking, the demographic at that time were older members. And so a couple of the wives, Nola Parkinson being one of them, and Mildred Jones, just came alongside this young girl and put their arms around me and kind of walked me through the process. And it was very much appreciated because they just kind of helped me navigate the ins and outs of the process, as well as, how to be a member's wife, how to conduct yourself. It was great. And of course the staff in the Republican office were awesome as well. So it was good. I basically ran his office, scheduled his appointments. I did a lot of constituent outreach, and the longer he served, of course, the greater the demand. So he had more committees, keeping him on task, as well as, I spent a lot of time with constituents, and then we brought, part-time staff came in to kind of help with the load. And so it was a lot of time spent. If John was in a committee, then I would visit with somebody about an issue, whether that be a lobbyist or a constituent. We did outreach into the district, and so we set up those meetings so he could get out there in the district and talk to people about what's happening in Salem. We didn't have computers at that time. We were amending bills by hand on the House floor. So you would, have a bill, and they would introduce language, and so you were sitting there cutting and pasting language on bills on the House floor during those early days. And so a lot of it was manual. It wasn't, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have computers. So I'm sure comparatively now we were in the dark ages at that time, but we just did it. We didn't think much of it, we just did it. John served 7 terms in the House, and then he was term limited out. And so there was work to be completed, things that we had started, some projects we had started, and I looked at that, and they asked me to run initially, and I was very reluctant to do so. But given some thought, I decided, well, I'm going to step up and do this. And so Lynn Snodgrass actually came to me and asked me if I would consider running, and after giving it some thought and talking it over with John, we decided to go ahead and continue the journey. So I jumped in 1998. I think having the training and being there in the building and understanding, the process, who the players were, kind of how a bill becomes a law, just some of those basic things, as well as you develop relationships in that process, your confidence grows and your skill grows. So I felt like I could tackle that. However, being staff and being member, those are different things. That session, term limits, had come into play. So the House of Representatives was basically emptied of all institutional knowledge. So you had people that had been there 20-some years or longer are gone. So it was quite the experience walking into that, and the people that had the most institutional knowledge were the lobbyists. So you had a group of individuals in the House that had very little experience. So that season and term limits really impacted the House of Representatives. In that regard, I had a little more experience than a lot of the folks that were coming in brand new. In 2001, Mark Simmons was Speaker, and I was Majority Leader. And the bottom was falling out of the economy, and we didn't have enough money to pay the bills. And that evolved into a long session, and then in addition to that, 5 special sessions going into '03. So I knew I had been part of that initial process. We got 35 Republican members elected to the House. And so I felt like it would be a natural progression to run for Speaker, and we were successful doing that. But it was a very, very challenging time in the state of Oregon. '03-05 sessions were the longest in the history of the state. And so folks, there was enough Republicans that wanted to go with the Democrats, and I said, okay, if you really think this is the best course, I didn't agree with that, but I'll let you have your vote. So it did pass. Well, guess what happened? The voters in Oregon didn't agree with that decision, and there was a referendum. And that tax was thrown out, which required us to come back in '05 and do the hard work that folks didn't want to do in '03. It seemed like my life was one big budget negotiation, because that was the prevailing issue at that period of time. You didn't have as much time to work on policy because we were so caught up in just trying to manage the budget and making sure that the allocations of funds were responsibly put together. So you had a real clash of philosophies. Some say, well, rather than, I don't want to cut services, I don't want to cut budgets, I just want to go raise taxes. I just want people to pay more. So you have the clash of how do we get through this period of time? And every time, you thought you had the fix on what the need was, well, then the numbers kept dropping. So you'd have to come back in and address it again. It was a very difficult time in the state of Oregon, because you just felt like you're chasing your tail. Every time you thought you had a fix on it, then new numbers would come in and you have to go back in and address them. But another bill we worked on was a bill that would require judges, when assigning custody, to examine domestic violence and to consider that when they were assigning custody. At the time, I felt strongly that women in particular who are victims of domestic violence, they have to work, and they're in the workplace. And so I introduced a bill that said if a woman needs to leave her, not just a woman, a man for that matter, if somebody has to leave their place of employment because of domestic violence, because they've moved out of the home, they've separated themselves from their abuser, but the one place that abuser knows that person is at their place of employment. So I felt like it was necessary to allow someone in that situation to be able to get unemployment benefits if they have to leave a place of employment to protect themselves from their abusers. I think legislators, and I've watched them sacrifice to serve. That process is, you put your heart, your soul, and your family is part of that. And I think families of legislators aren't appreciated enough because it's just not that member that makes that sacrifice. Oftentimes family members make that sacrifice as well because they're going through, whether there's critical press or there's pressure from a constituent or whatever that is. That's not just that individual that goes through that. It's their children, their spouses, their parents. Oregon is a citizens legislature. They meet every year now, whereas when I started, it was every other year. But I'll tell you, one individual can make a world of difference. If you are passionate about something and you really believe in it, you can go to the Oregon Legislature or any legislator and make a difference. And so if you don't let the process intimidate you, and you may not be successful your first session, but if you keep at it and you keep educating and you keep talking to people in that process, you can make a difference.